Hey, Cryptozones. It's 10 p.m. Pacific time. My name is Nicodemus, and welcome back to the Crypto Overnighter, where we take a nightly look at the crypto, NFT, and metaverse space. And keep in mind, nothing in this show should ever be considered financial advice. It's November 11th, 2022, and I want to wish a very happy Veterans Day to my fellow vets, and welcome to the weekend. Let's go. The inevitable has finally arrived. Sam Bankman-Fried has left the building. At FTX, anyway. He stepped down today. Now, this news came out along with word that FTX, FTX US, Alameda Research, and some roughly 130 other companies are filing bankruptcy. They started those proceedings today. And so it was announced in a tweet on Friday morning that FTX said that companies in the FTX group have started Chapter 11 proceedings in the United States. SBF took to Twitter again to echo his earlier apology from yesterday. He said that he's really sorry about what happened with FTX. Quote, "Hopefully, things can find a way to recover. Hopefully, this can bring some amount of transparency, trust, and governance to them. Ultimately, hopefully, it can be better for customers." Now, they weren't filing bankruptcy for the entire FTX empire. According to the filing, LedgerX, FTX Digital Markets, FTX Australia, and FTX Express Pay are not included in the bankruptcy. One thing missing from the announcement was talk about a potential recovery plan for investors. Now, people have been trying to get their tokens off the exchange, and there's lots of liquidity issues, which is why FTX's website says that they're unable to process withdrawals. But the bankruptcy was only part of the announcement. Another, arguably more interesting component of the announcement was SBF's resignation. Taking over for Sam is one John J. Ray III. Now, if he sounds familiar to you, I'm impressed because I had no idea who this guy is. But he's the Enron guy. He's the guy that shepherded Enron through their bankruptcy and the onslaught of settlements in the early 2000s. He is now CEO of FTX. And it's not hard to see why. He's got a rep for turning around failing companies. Previous to this, he worked as a chief restructuring officer and plan administrator for high-profile bankruptcy cases. Nortel Networks was one of them. He said, quote, "The immediate relief of Chapter 11 is appropriate to provide the FTX group the opportunity to assess its situation and develop a process to maximize recoveries for stakeholders. The FTX group has valuable assets that can only be effectively administered in an organized joint process." So here's the thing, though. When Ray was at the forefront of events to get more than $20 billion back at the hands of those swindled investors, he got a rep for standing up to Wall Street. The consequences for the bankruptcy filing are just starting to emerge. The Securities and Exchange Commission for Cyprus is called CySEC. CySEC has issued a statement in response to FTX's Chapter 11 filings. In their response, they're requesting FTX Europe to halt operations. Now, this comes to us from Reuters. So, CySEC said that on November 9th, they asked FTX's Euro arm to, quote, "suspend its operations and to proceed immediately with a number of actions for the protection of investors." Now, FTX Europe is one of those 130 or so companies included in the bankruptcy filing I was just talking about. But this brings things full circle here, because it was CySEC that approved FTX to operate in Cyprus back in March after they based their HQ in Switzerland. And now, months later, they're asking FTX to wind down their operations. So that's one nation's response to the FTX crisis. The Bahamas took a different approach. They froze FTX's funds and said that it would take the approval of a Supreme Court-appointed liquidator to unlock them. And so it was the Securities Commission of the Bahamas that froze the assets of FTX Digital Markets and related parties on November 10th. They also suspended FTX's registration in the country. Now, remember when I said earlier, FTX Digital Markets is not included in the bankruptcy filings FTX submitted today. And that's why. The Bahamas already had frozen FDM's assets. The Securities Commission said that they know of, quote, public statements suggesting that clients' assets were mishandled, mismanaged, and or transferred to Alameda Research. And I think that's really going to be what does Sam in. The misuse of client assets is something that courts just generally don't get over. So now the Securities Commission has stripped powers away from the higher-ups at FTX. They said the most prudent thing to do was to put FTX into a professional liquidation, quote, to preserve assets and stabilize the company. So what happened is the Bahamas Supreme Court has appointed a provisional liquidator. They said, quote, no assets of FDM, client assets, or trust assets held by FDM can be transferred, assigned, or otherwise dealt with without the written approval of the provisional liquidator. The Securities Commission said that they would work with the liquidator to get the best possible outcome for both customers and stakeholders of FTX. Brian Armstrong was on CNBC when he said that he wants U.S. authorities to respond to FTX's financial crisis, not by taking over the situation, not by bailing anybody out. He said that the U.S. needs to step up and lead the way globally to regulate crypto. He said Coinbase has been a big advocate for crypto regulation in the U.S., and he compared the way his exchange operates versus FTX. He rightly points out that FTX isn't every exchange on the planet, that they don't all operate the same way. He said his exchange has taken the approach of getting licenses from the CFTC, money transmission licenses, as well as issuing public financial statements. Then Armstrong engaged in a bit of speculation as to the reason for FTX's demise. He said that Coinbase doesn't invest customer funds without their explicit direction, kind of the thing that Cyprus was talking about. And I totally agree with his assessment. Obfuscated rehypothecation is horrible. He said, quote, that's an issue. And Armstrong did some direct comparisons. He compared the United States to Europe, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Australia as having made positive steps. He did point to the Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act that was championed by Sam and said that this was an example of positive steps. I'm not so sure about that, but that's one area that Armstrong and SBF work together. They both support the DCCPA. Now, this bill was put forth by Democrat Senator Debbie Stabenow and Republican Senator John Boozman. And there are some that are supporting it because it says that the Commodities Future Trading Commission would regulate crypto, not the SEC, not their regulation by enforcement. Detractors of the DCCPA said that it's a DeFi killer. So, Voyager Digital, remember these guys? They loaned a bunch of money in unsecured loans, and then the people that they loaned the money to went under during the Luna Black Swan event. That meant Voyager went under, in part because of the loans, but in part because of the general downturn in the crypto markets. SBF approached Voyager with an offer. Voyager turned them down. Eventually, the exchange found itself on the auction block. And lo and behold, Voyager's highest bidder was FTX. FTX submitted the $1.4 billion winning bid, beating out Binance and Wave Financial. It looks like that deal was never completed. In fact, it looks like FTX owes Voyager. Because in a press release that went out today, Voyager said that they have about $3 million locked up on FTX. They said it was mostly locked up Luna 2 and Serum. Well, now that FTX is in Chapter 11, Voyager Digital and the Voyager Official Committee of Unsecured Creditors announced that they've reopened the bidding process and that they're in active communications with potential buyers. As far as disclosures go, Voyager said that there's a $5 million good faith deposit from FTX US to Voyager Digital. That's going to be held in escrow. They said that they didn't transfer any of their assets to FTX. And before, we reported on this show that Alameda Research owed Voyager Digital. Voyager said that they've received 6,500 Bitcoin and 50,000 Ethereum from Alameda, and that debt is clear. So that's one beneficiary of SBF's altruism, or would have been if the deal had gone through. BlockFi was another. They were also bailed out by Sam, and they have halted client withdrawals on their platform. In a tweet on Friday, they said that it was a lack of clarity around FTX, FTX US, and Alameda Research that's preventing them from operating as normal. So they're limiting platform activity until things are made clear. They're also asking customers not to deposit to the platform for either their BlockFi wallets or the interest-bearing accounts. This comes not long after Flory Marquez on November 8th told us that all of BlockFi's products were operating as normal. They cited their $400 million line of credit from FTX US. And technically, FTX US is separate from FTX, and they're not having a liquidity crisis. Marquez said something interesting. They said all BlockFi will remain an independent entity at least until July of next year. That's likely referencing their line of credit deal. But that was then. And now, FTX US has a banner saying that trading might be halted on the platform at any time, which leads to the question of what happens to that line of credit. Is it still good? Or does FTX US have to cannibalize it to fund something else? In the meantime, California's Department of Financial Protection and Innovation said today that they were taking steps to suspend BlockFi's lending license while they investigate the crypto lender. According to a release put out by the regulator, this was in response to BlockFi's halt of customer withdrawals. This suspension will go for at least 30 days. They said, quote, BlockFi's announcement made on November 10th, 2022 from its Twitter account acknowledged that it cannot operate business as usual given a lack of clarity on the status of FTX.com, FTX US, and Alameda. The DFPI is investigating BlockFi's compliance with the laws within the commissioner's jurisdiction, including the California financing law. The DFPI is also investigating FTX. And we're going to call it there for the night. I want to thank you, my listeners, because when you stop listening, I will stop talking. We'll see you tomorrow night.